Alright everyone, so before we get started, Old Man Dan here has a few words for all y'all. I love swords and sorcery anime. You've got the classics like Record of Lodoss War, you've got the comedy take, and far and away, my personal favorite example is Escaflowne. All of these shows have a few things in common. They are all about adventures through fantastic and magical worlds. They feature interesting characters and have a wide influence range of Western sources like Tolkien, D&D, Conan, and so forth. So I was originally somewhat intrigued when I heard about the Sacred Blacksmith. A Western-style fantasy seems harder and harder to find these days, so a chance to dive back into a favorite genre was welcome. Our story begins, as these things often do, with a recent war between several human kingdoms, where they were fought using demonic magic. These so-called devil's contracts gave each side great powers, but as you might imagine, it came with some downsides. Devil contracts were banned, and the peace agreement was signed between all of the nations. So we got the swords and the sorcery down, and the style has a distinctly European influenced feel to it, so at the start, all seems well. But this is where the train starts to wobble on the rails a bit. This is our protagonist, a novice knight named Cecily Campbell. Cecily is a member of the City Watch that protects a small trading town. She's earnest, she has a strong sense of justice and loyalty, and she's pretty much just your standard issue anime fantasy protagonist with nothing to really set her apart, aside from a truly confusing choice of headwear, but okay, hold on, back up. There are two other things that set her apart. The breasts, which are focused on so many times in the show, they come up in the first 5 minutes, and it's far and away the most common thing that comes up about her. So, more on that later. While on duty, Cecily runs into a mad knight rampaging through the town that she protects, and in what I would generously call a battle, her sword is shattered, and rather than running away or doing anything to protect herself like a sane person might, she falls to her knees and waits to die. A hero steps in, and I kid you not, shears the rampaging knight's sword in two with his katana. Not a magical katana, not something made out of crazy space metal, just an ordinary sword. Fine show. I'll bite my tongue for now, stupider things have happened. Cecily's savior is Luke Ainsworth, a blacksmith living outside of town. He is also a raging jerkwad who puts down others and is generally unlikable. His assistant over there is Lisa, a character who I will vent my grievances on later. After the whole kerfuffle in the streets, Cecily wants to have her sword reforged. And we learn that swords that everyone uses in this town are using mold cast blades. I have to stop the show right here. It's time for a little history lesson, everybody. The last time combat-ready European swords were cast in molds was in the Bronze Age. This technique was over 2,000 years out of date by the time the Middle Ages rolled around. Yet we are clearly seeing late medieval steel weapons used in this show. While you can cast steel swords, the result would be a bendy, fragile, and almost worthless blade. And you cannot watch the first act of Conan the Barbarian to call it research. No show with the word blacksmith should be pulling this. Tangent over. As you might expect, Cecily is enamored with Luke's nigh-indestructible katana and asks him to make one for her. He refuses, but the negotiations between them are quickly swept under the rug, as Luke, Lisa, and Cecily all run off in a group to join a bunch of knights that are being attacked by bandits and monsters. Just as before, Cecily is utterly worthless in a scuffle and is swiftly knocked back out of the fight. But Luke's super katana makes him an unstoppable killing machine. Things get hairy when a devil's contract is performed and a giant crystal beast appears. But Cecily jumps in to shield Luke, who tells her to buy him some time. So, for reasons that the show barely bothers to explain, he can use some sort of crazy blacksmithing magic to create a weapon out of thin air to defeat the monster. This spell carries on for a while, going over every single conceivable step of Japanese sword making. It just doesn't end until finally, a solid minute of actual screen time later, the sword is ready. Cecily, what has she been doing? Has she been blocking the monster's attacks with her body? Has she been fighting to keep it distracted? No, she's been standing there gaping like a trout, looking away from the enemy. Who, in all honesty, is just being a terrific sport and not bothering to attack since the spell started. Unsurprisingly, Luke and the sure-kill katana make short work of the monster. And I want you to pay very close attention to what happens a few moments later, because it seems that swords are not the only thing using obsolete techniques and crappy materials in this world. Oh yes, for the second time in less than a day, the show goes straight to Cecily's rack, and if you sense a running theme, congratulations, you win something. But we now cut to a bunch of people discussing something we have never heard of before called Valbenel in very serious tones. And we also meet a mysterious man in black looming ominously in the moonlight. I wonder if either of these things will be important in the future. At the same time, Cecily's work against the monsters, which I will remind you was mostly getting the piss beaten out of her and standing around gobbing, has earned her a special assignment to safeguard the newest member of the cast, Arya. Arya can transform from a human form into a magical demon sword. And as a sword, she can create deadly gusts of wind. Andy, dandy, makes Julian fries, all that kind of stuff. Still, Arya is a sword, and a demonic one at that, and it's not really clear that, well, nobody really likes her, really. When confronted by this, Cecily says that knights should use their swords to protect people. And I know the show is trying to show that she's a kind and caring person, but I find myself agreeing with the jerk over here. A sword is meant to kill people. It can be used to kill to protect others, sure, but at the end of the day, it's supposed to cause harm. And even when Cecily is attacked by people who are possessed by evil snake monsters that can't be considered human, she cannot get it into her head that sometimes killing is the only option you have. I again find myself agreeing with her superior. She is too weak-willed to be an effective warrior. So in response to this, Cecily decides to redouble her training, not to get better at protecting the citizens or to overcome her knightly shortcomings, no, but because she wants to be good enough to earn a katana from Luke. So not only is she ignorant and weak-willed, she is also selfish, delightful traits to have in a protagonist. You know what? Let's talk about Cecily a little more to understand how she and the show's plot are in a race to see who can sink this boat faster. You see, Cecily is just a terrible character from start to finish, and I am not just talking about how she is constantly shown up by her male co-star. She is dense and lacks even the most rudimentary fighting ability. In episode 1, she charges blindly at her foes with no skill or expertise to back it up. And after spending tons of time talking about how much she's trained, you'd think she would get better. But in the final episode, she is still charging ahead blindly without thinking, relying on brute force and dumb luck to get her through. Her character never changes from her earnest, big-headed beginnings. And despite not wanting to hurt people, Cecily reacts to mundane situations with bouts of unrelenting violence. This is what happens when Luke says it's funny to see her in a dress. And God help you if you even hint at the idea that she might be attracted to someone, because she will freaking cut you. This is a woman who goes on and on about justice and protecting others. She repeatedly states that she never wants to use Arya's powers to hurt people. Yet she constantly uses violence to get her way, at one point wounding several of her friends and bullying others into accepting her viewpoint. This is all a dramatic change from the Cecily that's supposed to appear in the books that the show is based on. She's supposed to be a fast learner, great leader of soldiers. She combines strength of will and compassion to make a positive, likable, kind of Joan of Arc-like character. Yet here, they made anime Cecily a walking boob joke. And they mandated at least 2 breast gags per episode. I didn't have that era. That's in the show. A character that was once defined by her personality and skills is reduced to her sex characteristics by a hack writing staff. And that is how this turned into this. So anyway, about that special assignment that Cecily's superiors were given to her about protecting Arya. Well, they want to use Cecily and Arya to draw out a hidden foe from this poorly copy-pasted crowd. See if you can spot the copy lines. The plan finally succeeds and a giant demon appears, but the city guards, to their credit, are on top of this. They've got spearmen at the ready, they have got a cleric squad creating a magical barrier to contain the demon, and they are led by the massive, awesome, and ridiculously named Captain Hannibal Dang I'm Huge Quasar. I wish we were following these guys instead of Cecily for the entire show. But all of that plan falls apart, and Luke has to jump in and save everyone, like always. So this opens up a chance for Cecily and Arya to stop the monster. Cecily steadfastly refuses to learn a lesson from any of this, claiming that Arya is a weapon not used to hurt others. You just used her to kill a dude. It was necessary. The lesson should be sometimes you gotta put some poor bastard in the ground. But after this plot point, we take an entire episode aside to follow Lisa, Luke's elf-eared assistant here. And we spend a whole bunch of time watching her play dress up, an entire episode that feels intensely out of place because moments before this we were discussing how devil's contracts, those spells from the beginning, work. It involves a boatload of torture and black magic. This guy's about to get his chest cut open. The show's tone jumps around an awful lot, and it's either wacky hijinks or body horror. And the writers rapidly refocusing on Lisa acting cutesy like this seems like a ploy to avoid dealing with the most serious aspects of the show. And it's made even worse by the fact that Lisa actually has a pretty interesting backstory, which is touched on ever so briefly multiple times, but receives precisely zero payoff throughout the end. We move on and learn almost nothing about her for the rest of the show. After that Pretty Princess Dress Me Up episode, the plot picks up again and we find Cecily attacked by a bunch of unknown assailants, all of whom own their own ridiculous demon swords. How the hell do you even lit that thing? Despite having a magical wind sword and training with it every day, Cecily is still woefully unprepared, and it once again falls to Luke to save her. Our heroine isn't getting a lot of time to be the heroine, is she, when you think about it? It turns out that the attackers are servants of a refugee princess named Charlotte, who is on the run from an evil empire. And this girl spends several episodes explaining to us her tragic mom-centric backstory. Despite having tried to kill her, though, Cecily and her cronies take up residence in Cecily's home. This kicks off a bunch of episodes dedicated to slice-of-life garbage with characters going on about food, or dressing up in maid outfits, because you gotta cram that in here somehow. And at least now, this choice of headgear that Cecily has been having makes a little bit more sense, I guess. But we also get to make more cracks about Cecily's bust. Sure, why not? Even Cecily is getting tired of this by now, and so am I. What is the rest of the cast doing while we're putting up with this inane crap? Arya here is desperately trying to understand the nature of her existence and the truth behind demon swords. Why is this our B story? This is way more interesting. No, there's no time for that, the show says. That ambiguously named empire from before is tracking down Charlotte, and they already have forces on the trade town's doorstep, ready to unleash justice if they don't hand her over. Despite the immediate and dire political implications of this, Cecily decides she only wants the girls who assaulted her to escape and be happy. Aren't you just full of the milk of human kindness? Actually, she's not, because Charlotte's servants decide to steal back their own demon swords to try and use them to bargain with the Empire. Cecily, when confronting them in the ensuing fight, wounds every single one of them grievously. Remember, only one episode ago, these girls were making boob jokes while they were dressing up in maid outfits. Now they're letting out blood-curdling screams when they are stabbed by our protagonist. Cecily even smacks the hell out of Charlotte, a girl so woefully unprepared for a fight that even Cecily is good enough to beat her. Surely that is the mark of a great hero. Somehow, stabbing and smacking everyone around makes it all work out, and Charlotte and the others are able to flee to another city. And after 3 episodes, this finally reveals that the 4 demon swords were given to Charlotte by a mysterious figure, a man in black named Siegfried. This seems like important information that Cecily should rush to her superiors, but the show has other plans. We're going to get some copious backstory about Luke's tragic childhood, and we're going to have him and Cecily bond a little bit over his angry moping. And finally, Arya tries to no avail to keep things interesting by focusing again on her origin and purpose. The latter half of the show is an absolute train wreck as the writers stall for time before the climax. So, let's review. How has this show failed to live up to its potential? The plot has gone nowhere. The tone is all over the map, the characters are hollow and unlikable, and it feels like a cynical attempt to make money off of fan service rather than an honest attempt to make a fun or interesting show. First off, the plot. These are all things that are brought up in the show. The Man in Black, Luke, Cecily, and Lisa's relationships, the Devil's Contracts Wars and everything that came after that, and the imminent return of the demon lord Valvanel. You may remember that from way back in the beginning here with this slide. Valvanel is basically the super devil of their world, but this show barely scratches the surface of his importance. Out of all of these plot threads, this is the one that seems a little bit more important than all of the others. I hadn't mentioned it up until this point because it bears almost no resemblance to anything that shows up in the show, despite being key to the original story. Seriously, a giant hell beast sleeping beneath your town should not be put on the back burner, and it's not like the heroes don't have a personal stake in this. We do learn that Valvanel killed Luke's childhood friend. His entire motivation is to forge a weapon that can defeat the demon. And yet instead, the show is focusing on this kind of stuff. For every scene in which Valvanel is even mentioned, we get 2 or 3 scenes of them playing dress-up, and for every time that a demonic entity appears, We have to force our cast to dress up as maids and clean house. It kills the pacing of the show while making 13 episodes drag on for ages. Part of the problem is that the entire show takes place in this one boring quasi-medieval town. The setting is dull and unremarkable, set apart solely by the existence of devil contracts and a few magic swords. The world is intensely boring to look at and presumably to live in. Part of fantasy's appeal is supposed to be in its environments. Look at this place. I mean, the landscape alone fills you with a sense of wonder, a desire for adventure. You want to be there. Instead, we're stuck in boring McTriggistan with no adventure to be had. The story never goes anywhere and takes our heroes absolutely no further than a mile out of town at any point. The tone is nowhere near interesting enough for us to care what happens to anyone in it. So, after all of this, as more attacks mount on the town, barely 2 episodes before the finale, our villain, the Man in Black, finally appears in person. And it turns out, he's some dude. Wait a minute. No, he's not just some dude. He's that dude, who's been in the background the entire time. The one named Siegfried. Who would have thought that the mysterious knight in black armor sitting in on all of your secret meetings was also the villain? But why is Siegfried the villain? Is he out to expand the empire he works for? To steal the demon sword? No, in the laziest villain cliche of all, he just thinks that the world is disgusting and needs to be wiped clean. He declares war on peace and happiness, summoning a horde of demons to attack the town. And when Cecily fights against them admirably, taking down another of the monsters, breaking another sword in the process, she is once again completely outclassed by Luke. This is the climax, the end of the show, and our heroine is still playing second fiddle. Luke even gets to confront the main villain, while Cecily is forced to fight some lady lieutenant who barely showed up. Eventually, the fight with Siegfried does go poorly enough that Luke is wounded, and Cecily decides to step in and try and protect him. Despite his terrible wounds, Luke is still able to create another magic katana and hand it off to Cecily, while our ruthless villain stands by and watches. This is happening in real time in front of his eyes, and he does nothing. Be evil! You're the villain! It's your job! Luke then hands the katana to Cecily, who can't even use the block properly. Unless that blade is magnetic, I don't see how this is going to work. Cecily magically manages to overcome her own incompetence just long enough to wound Siegfried, who vanishes in a puff of smoke, swearing revenge Power Rangers villain style. And leaving our heroes to, wait, that's the end? That's the conclusion? Are you kidding me? If I were actually a fan of the source material, well, picture related, I guess. To wrap this all up, this is just a bit of theory, as I can't fully verify all of it. The show was created in 2009, I believe, which was the very end of the time when light novels were being adopted left, right, and center as new shows, and only the prologue of these stories was produced with no plans at any point to continue. So, they effectively skipped existing fans of the series and anyone interested enough to continue, largely because they wasted a whole bunch of time cramming in cutesy fan service. Additionally, the story was drastically reworked to add more cute bits of Lisa, disregarding her more important role in the plot, because the anime version shares a voice actress with Yui from K-On! Which was huge at the time, and they were going to get their money's worth, damn it. Even the character designs were altered to look more like the archetypal moe blobs that made that show popular. Digibro on YouTube is the one who pointed this out the first time, and he's the one you want to look up if you want more details. So if there is a lesson in any of this, if you're interested in swords and sorcery, never mix your moe with your fantasy, because otherwise you end up with this. Thank you all.